Despite the fact that I've been covering Peloton on this channel for 3 years now, I've never actually made a full review of the Peloton Bike or sort of my overall thoughts on the entire Peloton ecosystem. But after starting to ride my Peloton Bike more regularly again, and now having surpassed over 400 workouts completed on the Peloton Bike and Tread, as well as a good amount of the other classes, which may not sound like a lot to some of you, but I feel considering I've spent as much or more time testing out other connected fitness services for the channel, in addition to doing the majority of my workouts without any connected fitness services, mainly through running outside or lifting weights. So given all that, I think I not only have a complete view of how Peloton is in 2024, but also as to how it compares with pretty much every other alternative out there. So in this video, I'm going to give Peloton the full evaluation, from the good to the bad, from the bike to the tread and everything else in between, from the coaches to the overall experience, and give you what I believe is the most comprehensive review of Peloton as a whole in 2024. So let's start with the equipment itself. And if there is one thing to be said about Peloton, is that when it comes to their design, both in terms of quality and the overall look, it's really second to none. Now, that doesn't mean it's perfect or that it couldn't use to see some significant improvements, which we'll get to, but in terms of what's out there today in 2024, you're not going to find much that can match what Peloton has developed and what is included with the bike, tread, row, all of it. See, Peloton understands that home equipment needs to look good within a home because while some of us may not mind having a beast of a machine hidden away in our garage, most people don't have that luxury or just don't want to work out in the garage and want something that they can use in their living room or their bedroom that doesn't look cheap or feel strange in the room. Peloton's equipment just sort of fits and blends in and looks good. And while these devices may not exactly be works of art, there is a big difference between them and the rest. Take, for example, the NordicTrack S22i, which is also a very good bike, but it isn't something that I would want in my living room. Even the Peloton Guide, which is a Peloton accessory for your TV that allows you to track your strength training and see yourself on the screen. And while I really do not like this product as a whole, it's hard not to be impressed by how much thought and care went into its design. And while other companies are starting to catch on and get better with this, I think most people, regardless if they knew which company it was, would choose Peloton's designs just based on how much better they look than others. And the quality extends not just to the polished finish, but also just the elegance in the design itself that makes the equipment feel better to use than alternatives. The track wheel on the Peloton Tread being the best example of this, where instead of the traditional way you would adjust a treadmill speed and incline via buttons, Peloton developed this wheel design which once you use it is very hard to go back, as it just feels much more natural to use. You know how when the iPhone came out and all of a sudden you could scroll with your fingers instead of using buttons on a BlackBerry? You know, from that point on, there was really no going back. And I feel the same way here. And improving how we interact with the objects around us is a big deal. And that track wheel, while seemingly a small difference, really feels like a huge improvement. And that is just one of many design choices that Peloton has used to make their equipment just feel better than others. Even the resistance knob on the Peloton Bike, not only does it look iconic, but it also has a weight and accuracy to it that, while it is hard to describe, just feels better to use than the alternatives. Now, when it comes to quality, I do have to make one distinction here that I feel is important, and that is while I feel the overall quality for Peloton equipment is really in a class of its own, I only think that way about the Bike Plus, the Tread, Tread Plus, and Row. The original Peloton Bike, the one they market the most because it's the lowest price entry into the Peloton ecosystem, is not really at the same standard as the rest for a few reasons. One of those reasons is the accuracy of the metrics. So one of the really key differences between Peloton and some of their competitors that not too many people are aware of is that Peloton's devices are very well calibrated. So when you compare your scores versus somebody else on the leaderboard, it remains a fairly accurate comparison. And even more importantly, when you compare your progress over time from one workout to the next, you can be confident in the progress or lack of progress that you are seeing because the equipment constantly recalibrates to make sure that it adjusts for any changes that may have happened. For example, bumping the magnet or slightly having accidentally changed the position of one of the sensors. But the original Peloton Bike doesn't. And so unlike Peloton's other equipment, you can't fully always trust what the original Peloton bike tells you, as simply moving the bike from one room to the other could be enough to adjust the delicate calibration and throw things off. And while there is a way to self-calibrate the original bike, it can be pretty wonky, and even Peloton themselves do not suggest anybody does that, since they are more likely to make things worse than better. Another reason why I don't consider the original Peloton bike to be in the same category as the others is that everything from the touchscreen to the speakers to the processor and memory are all feeling very dated at this point, because the original bike hasn't been updated in about half a decade. And so when you compare the original bike to the others, it just feels a bit slow and clunky. And to me, it's sort of like watching a 4K movie and then going back to 1080p. It still works and it does the job, but all of a sudden, after you've become used to 4K, you would still rather watch things in 4K, and that's sort of the same feeling I get when going from any of Peloton's other equipment back to the original bike. Now, despite the equipment being well designed, it is actually the quality of the classes and the instruction that is the biggest separator for Peloton, and is the reason there are so many truly dedicated Peloton fanatics out there. And what's interesting is that Peloton actually does more with less here, opting not to use commonly used high-tech studios with changing backgrounds and effects. And instead, they've remained committed to a very simple layout with a few mostly stationary cameras with the focus solely on the instructor. And why this works so well is that you too become solely focused on the instructor, as if nothing else exists. And it is their words of inspiration or comedy or scientific understanding that draws you in, so much to the point that these instructors have become semi-celebrities. And not just because of the number of people watching them, but because of how much people have come to adore and idolize them. Because look, there are a lot of people taking Apple fitness classes, for example, but you don't see them acting like raving fans of those instructors. And it's largely due to how they are presented and how well the instructors are trained to present themselves here. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to suggest Peloton has the most qualified fitness instructors, something that is more noticeable when you take classes requiring more complex instruction like strength training, and I really do consider most of the Peloton instructors to simply be good actors, which is many of their backgrounds. But for classes on a bike or a treadmill, classes that are focused on repeating the same movement day in and day out, it's much more important for an instructor to be entertaining or motivating than it is for them to be technically brilliant. And Peloton's understanding and execution of this has really been huge and a catalyst to growing this rapid fan base and keep their subscription numbers strong. Because once you get used to having these instructors alongside you, you always sort of just want them there. It's hard to give them up. And that's not even mentioning the music, which is the other half of the equation that separates a Peloton class from any other. Peloton pays a lot of money to be able to have access to pretty much any music they want, and so the instructors are able to handcraft their classes to provide the exact experience for each minute of the class that they are looking for. And given that Peloton films so many new classes every week, it's very easy to find new classes from an instructor that you both like and with music that you like. And for a lot of people, it's the music that drives them back even more than the instructors themselves. And having good music that is themed or timed around what you are doing in the class, it just elevates the experience to a whole new level, far above other services which tend to use radio stations playing random music. And it's the combination of a really well thought out music selection alongside the instructor's ability to draw you in that is the perfect brew for what makes Peloton, well, Peloton. And then there is also the social aspect that makes Peloton so unique, with a leaderboard where quite often you'll be working out with hundreds, if not thousands of other people taking your specific class at the same time as you. And for some people, the leaderboard is a great incentive to try and push themselves and rank as high as they can. But for me, and I think probably for most people taking Peloton classes, the leaderboard is most valuable in that it just makes you feel like you aren't alone. You aren't just taking a class by yourself in your house. You are riding alongside hundreds of other people, many of which will give you a digital high five for no other reason, just to say, hey, good job, I see you, I'm here with you, let's do this, let's get it. And that feeling, as simple and as small as it may seem, that feeling of just getting a notification that somebody high-fived you while you're taking a class, it goes a long way towards making you appreciate the community that has been built here. It makes you appreciate that, yes, it's tough. Yes, this is hard, but there are so many other people here with me and they are supporting me. And that, again, is a feeling that you do not get with most other connected fitness services. Though while the instructed classes on the bike are great, with tons of instructors with different personalities and different musical tastes to choose from, the quality of the experience does start to drop off when moving from the bike to the tread or the row, or even more so when you take strength or other category classes. One reason is simply because there are less people taking them. So instead of hundreds of people in a class with you on the treadmill, you may have like 20 or even less. But more importantly, the breadth of the class types and the instructors with different personalities gets massively shrunk down. So you have a lot less options to choose from. And at least in my opinion, the instructors just aren't as good in general or as engaging in general as those that are on the bike. Because while Peloton does try to have talent spread everywhere, they definitely save the very best for where the most people are. In addition, one of my personal favorite aspects of Peloton, which is that they provide power zone training, is completely absent on the treadmill and rower. And the reason power zone training is so important here, at least for somebody like me, is because I really care about smart training that is progressive and balanced and that'll allow me to see long-term progress. And power zone classes are really the only ones here with that thought process in mind. And since it's not offered outside of the bike, for me at least, I have to change what I do on those other devices, and I don't actually listen to the instructor, which then takes me out of the whole experience and is not nearly as enjoyable. And it's when you start taking other class types like strength training that it becomes very clear that many, though not all, but many of the Peloton instructors are very much more on the spectrum of being actors and actresses than they are legitimate coaches. And you also start to notice just how important the music aspect is to Peloton, because on the bike, the music really helps carry you through. And the instructor doesn't always have to say much because the music is just so good. And so they can pick and choose their moments with what they want to say, and it comes across really well. With strength workouts, the music is much less a factor because you're constantly changing movements or sets, and the instructor is trying to get you prepared for the next thing or giving you cues. And so the instructors have to talk a lot more. And so while the experience is still good, it is far from the same as what you'll get when you're on the bike. And with many of the coaches, their ability to instruct or their movement quality or just the class structure and how it's designed, none of it is really that great, at least when it comes to strength. And in this category is where you see other connected fitness services offer around the same quality, if not sometimes better. Peloton just doesn't have as much of an advantage here. It's just not what they're strong at. Peloton also did create a product as well called the Peloton Guide, which is designed for your TV so you can see yourself next to the instructor and see your form and track your reps. And really the product ended up being sort of a joke. It wasn't able to analyze your form or give feedback like others can. The rep counting on it was non-existent, though they have improved that many months after its release. And it just doesn't provide enough value to use it over just taking a class on your bike or TV without it. The biggest thing that the Peloton Guide added was a much better UI for strength workouts. And when it came out in my review, I was sort of pissed off because the improved UI was clearly the best part about the Peloton Guide. And that is something they could have easily added to the bike or the app. Like, it had nothing to do with the actual Peloton Guide device itself. And now just the other week, years after the guide was released, they have finally brought that improved UI over to the other devices. I just felt like that was a crappy move by Peloton to get people to purchase this poorly thought out device, and it annoyed me even more so knowing that members are paying over $40 a month to use their service. Now, outside of instructed content, Peloton does have some other options, one of which is a game mode called Lane Break, which asks you to change lanes by changing resistance and hold certain outputs. And honestly, I think it's pretty well made. It's a fun alternative to regular classes, and they do add new workouts here very often. The problem for me is that they just really miss out on a lot of what I enjoy about Peloton, which is the leaderboard, which allows you to see who you're taking the class with, and also personally the fact that they don't have any Power Zone versions of Lane Break sort of makes it a deal breaker for me, so I rarely check it out. Now, Peloton also recently added entertainment options, which is something people have asked for years. So now you can watch Netflix or Disney Plus or some other streaming services while you work out. And it is nice to see this finally added, especially for days when you want to have a lower intensity or maybe a zone 2 ride, where in those cases, sometimes having an instructor feels very unnecessary. So it's nice to have these options finally available. And then there are some scenic rides, which is by far the weakest category for Peloton. Now they have traditional scenic rides where you just follow along a trail or whatever, and those are okay, though not great, as they seemed filmed by a drone and so make you sort of feel like you're just floating through these areas. And because unlike Nordic track bikes, for example, Peloton cannot incline or decline the bike, so you don't really get any sense of immersion as you go up or down a hill. But again, you mostly take these when you just want to zone out, and so they are just fine for that purpose. And then there are the instructed scenic rides, which it looks like Peloton really tried here with a pretty big budget productions, and they just failed miserably with them. I get the feeling that the crew who filmed and edited these had never done anything like this before, and so you get these strange camera angles that don't feel good to watch when trying to be immersed, and it just all feels sort of awkwardly done. Definitely by far the least enjoyable experience that I have seen Peloton put out, and unfortunately it looks like they've just stopped trying to make more of these instead of trying to make them better, which is fine, though if they had put more effort into this, they could have easily been a great addition to the Peloton library. Now, I've mentioned a lot of great things about Peloton and how they really have elevated the indoor workout experience. And while I have discussed what Peloton isn't good at, I think the strength of Peloton vastly outweighs where they are weak. But the next question is it all worth the cost? Because Peloton isn't cheap. In fact, it's probably far more expensive than you think, especially since most of us tend to underestimate how much we pay over time with subscription models like this, which is why so many companies use them. Now, in terms of the upfront cost, the original Peloton bike, which I mentioned I feel is not on the same quality level as the rest, cost around $1,500. For the Bike Plus, the cost rises to $2,500. And for the treadmill and rower, you are going to get closer to $3,000, not to mention the Tread Plus, which cost a whopping $6,000. And while that is the upfront cost, the way I evaluate the true cost is I add the price of the subscription service as well for the minimum length of time that I think I should be able to get out of my device to get my money's worth. And for Peloton equipment, that minimum length for me is 5 years. So because the cost of the membership is $44 per month, after 5 years, that membership adds up to a total of $2,640, which means that even for just the original bike, you are looking at a total cost closer to $4,000. And that is a lot of money. There's no two ways around that, especially when compared to the alternative of just buying a regular indoor bike for $300 and watching a show on your iPad or television. So to make the jump from $300 to $4,000, you have to really value what Peloton brings to the table here. And for me, and I think for many others, especially since I share the Peloton membership and equipment with my wife, it is worth it. We do appreciate how well it works and how it's designed and all the classes and the instructors. And we also put a very high value on our fitness and health. And so we're willing to spend more than most people. But I could also see that what Peloton provides is just not enough to justify that enormous price difference for many others. And so for many people who may not have a ton of extra money at the moment, or maybe just don't care that much about that Peloton experience, well, in that case, I agree, it would not make sense to purchase anything from Peloton. It's a lot of money, and that's with the original bike, which I feel is pretty outdated. If you go for the Peloton Bike Plus, for example, that 5-year cost jumps all the way up to $5,000. And so after taking over 400 workouts, and I think my wife has completed more workouts than me, so a combined 1,000 workouts with Peloton, we definitely think it's worth it. And after comparing Peloton with a ton of other devices, I also think that if you're going to get a bike and have the money, it's probably going to be the best way to go. Though my opinion does change if all you want is a treadmill or a rower, because like I said, the experience and the class options and instruction on those devices pales in comparison to what is offered on the bike. And also when it comes to treadmills and rowers, there are a lot more options that are similar in quality, but far cheaper. And so I probably wouldn't suggest Peloton if you weren't looking at the bike. The bike is really the heart and soul of the company, and unfortunately, at least as of right now, they haven't been able to bottle the same magic with any of their other devices. And I would also be lying to you if I told you I wasn't worried about the future of Peloton. Despite some of the recent updates they've been making that I think are great, the company itself is in deep financial trouble and has been so for years now. And at this point, I honestly don't see a way for Peloton to continue long term without being sold and restructured. So it's just something that I think has to happen in order for them to not go out of business. And so I see the potential of a lot of changes coming ahead. And they might be great changes, but they could also not be. And it's not hard to find examples of companies out there that were bought, changed, and ended up losing everything about it that was good in order to meet profitability goals of a brand new investor. So yes, I am concerned about what a purchase of Peloton may look like. Again, it could be a good thing that makes things even better, but you just never know. But all of that aside, I think Peloton is a fantastic company in many ways. It's just so impressive to see what they've built, both in terms of their physical products, the classes, the way in which they've built this fanatical community of members who just love Peloton so much. It's hard not to get sucked into it all. And when you have a Peloton, it is really a magical experience that I haven't seen replicated among the hundreds of other devices that I've tested and reviewed. I think after all of the time that I've spent covering Peloton and taking classes, there has been times where I've been frustrated with the company and the pricing. And there are just like 100 things that I wish they would add or change that I feel they don't really care about. But despite all of that, Peloton is something that I still really enjoy. And after 3 years, I'm still looking forward to my next ride. And that is something that is very special. And for that reason, it is still why I do suggest people consider Peloton if they want to get in shape at home. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, this is Colin Jenkins with Connect the Watts. Make sure to subscribe for all the latest in connected fitness, and I'll see you next time.